welcome to Work Week. This is Steve Zeltzer. I'm with Will Lehman, and he's an auto worker from Mack, and he is running for president of the UAW. He's the first socialist to run for president of the UAW, and he's a two-tier worker, rank and file worker, who's fighting for a new direction in the UAW. So welcome, Will.
Thanks for having me on.
So Will, how did you get involved in the union and your struggle in your plant?
Basically, in 2017, I was hired and I was in a tier. We have a progression, so it's a step tier system. But, I at first really liked the job, liked being in the UAW. And, I was taking as much overtime as I could get. And I would joke that I'm saving for the strike at the end of the contract. And Mack hadn't struck in 35 years. So I didn't know what the case was going to be with it. But when it came contract time, 79% of the plant voted to strike if our conditions weren't met. And one of the big things with me was eliminating tiers. And that's why I wanted to strike, trying to get back past concessions. And that contract is basically sold out. I mean, I was kind of really disenfranchised with how the UAW bargains and negotiates with the company after that. And I didn't really see a way to make any changes with that, because there's a lot of excuses like, oh, the strike pay is so low because of how they do things at International. And, that starved guys out on the line. So I was kind of disenfranchised with that whole thing, started reading a lot of labor history. People like Eugene Debs, brought me into kind of socialism, looking at what's that. And, reading about Soviet Union, how it started, the betrayals of Stalin, that kind of thing. And eventually in 2021, NRV, New River Valley Volvo, went on strike. And Volvo is the parent company of Mack, and they make big trucks down there in Virginia, just like ours. And they actually paint the cabs that get sent up to Mack. And we were essentially handling scab cabs. And I read an article that someone forwarded to me from Mack, from the World Socialist website, that was talking about the NRV struggle. And they made a rank and file committee, and were trying to essentially take the power of bargaining into their own hands. The workers on the floor, they wanted to openly negotiate with the company on the floor. And that was really attractive to me, that idea. And they were also calling for full strike pay. I went to my local union meeting. It was the first meeting after I think 13 months or 16 months because of COVID. And I said, these guys should be getting full strike pay. And they had all kinds of excuses why they wouldn't. And also they made the point of their rank and file committee that we're handling scab cabs. And so we formed a rank and file committee at Mack, a few workers, and we called for joint strike action to bring strength to their movement. So that's kind of what got me into the idea of, forming rank and file committees and the workers taking the control of the union in their own hands.
Well, when the UAW was formed in the 30s and 40s, they had workers' power in the shop floor. And what you're talking about seemed like it was actually how workers organized. If they had a grievance, they'd handle it on the shop floor, shut production down, and they would link up with workers all over in the same company. It seems like that solidarity, direct worker action, has gone away from not only the UAW, but other unions in this country.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, we saw it last year with BCTGM, the Kellogg strike in the fall. Basically their union was calling out Mexican workers for, I think I'm not sure what capacity he held, but he was higher up. He said, you wouldn't drink the water from Mexico, so why would you eat the cereal? Well, how's that going to unite workers and bring strength to your fight if you're dividing them up by country? And workers on the floor don't want to be divided up. Workers see that this is now a global thing. And like you said back in the beginning, America made 4 out of 5 of every car on the planet. They had the power to shut it down in kind of a national way. But they didn't branch out internationally. They drove a lot of the socialists out of the union. And then you see decades of degradation. And when you took that power away from the floor and all those strong fights they used to wage back in the beginning of the UAW, that's where the degradation starts. And same thing with the global nature of production, which, they still harp on made in USA. Well, that's not how you're going to fight these multinational companies. So we need to organize internationally.
And this ideology of business unionism, which is supported by the AFL-CIO, most of the unions in this country, collaboration with the bosses. They see the same interests, that they have to have collaboration. It has, as you said, led to in Mexico, where in Silao, the GM, the US unions, AFL-CIO, as well as the State Department, are intervening in the Mexican labor situation. You call for solidarity with the GM workers who were fired in Silao, and say that they should have been brought back to the plant when they got a contract. What's your view about the international operations of the AFL-CIO? They have the Solidarity Center, which gets $75 million a year from National Endowment for Democracy, from the US government. And I understand that the US State Department now is spending $120 million supposedly to bring democracy to the Mexican labor movement.
Yeah, they don't want true democracy, workers on the floor having any power. They want to channel it into that same dead end that we kind of find ourselves in today. You know, if there's going to be a union, it needs to be solidarity on the shop floor, not fealty to a bunch of bureaucrats that aren't tied to the work. You know, so that's the kind of thing I'm bringing forward, is the idea that we're solid on the floor. You know, not this. Hopefully, the trade union will represent our best interests. You know, because it's not about being led so much as it is, you know, putting forth our demands ourselves.
And you call for direct solidarity action with workers at GM, workers at Mack, which is owned by Volvo. You see that as the future of internationalism and building worker solidarity, workers working for the same company, linking up internationally and taking direct action globally?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to elaborate on that, the reality is with that corporatism, you know, these unions basically keep bargaining under capitalism, and they want to keep. They think that they can make these inroads under the capitalist system when it's absolutely hostile to it, and you know, splitting us up based on country, things like that. Ultimately, the workers will need to take power of the situation if we're going to be able to take care of ourselves. I mean, we've seen over the decades this vast inequality grow, you know, where the wealth is distributed, you know, where you can't buy a house as a worker, you can't raise a family, you know, where I was talking to different retirees and even older workers who talk about their parents or grandparents that were in the UAW, and they used to be able to raise a family on one wage.
And there's also an effort to pit black against brown, white against black, the rise of fascism in this country. How do you see the unions organizing against the rise of fascism? And you think supporting the Democrats is going to stop fascism?
No. If anything, both parties encourage it in a way, in their own weird way. You know, Trump directly and Biden indirectly. And just, you know, their solution to these things is just vote for more Democrats. You know, well, the reality is that's not solving the problem. And same thing with, you know, promoting people based on claiming that diversity in the bureaucracy will bring, you know, solidarity on the shop floor. The reality is equal working conditions on the shop floor will bring equality. And the only ones that can do that are the workers. You know, is the fight for a worker-controlled society. It's not going to be supporting Democrats. You know, they're making the best case for themselves to reelect Trump because the workers see how bad things are under, and not as a support of Trump, but just the fact that, you know, things are this bad under Biden. And, you know, if you're not looking at really what's politically going on, you're going to say, oh, I want the opposite of what this is. And then you end up electing someone like Trump, who's an outright fascist.
And the Vermont AFL-CIO called for a general strike against insurrection or attempted coup. The threat of a fascist government or a dictatorship. What do you think that the labor movement should do to organize? And do you see organizing a united front of all working class people against a threatened coup in the United States? Because it seems like the fascists are organizing, regardless of the results of elections, to take direct action.
Well, my whole campaign has been to, you know, raise awareness of building that international worker solidarity. You know, I talk about the International Workers Alliance of Rank and File Committees. That was something that was launched by the International Committee of the Fourth International back in May of last year. And that's the way forward, is that worker organization not just against fascism, but the reality is capitalism is what's bringing this about. That's why I'm calling for worker control, for socialism. But it's about learning the past. We have to learn, where socialism got misled in the past, and that's Stalinist movements. And workers, there's a lot of history that we all have to learn to make that path forward. But it is about organizing the working class, and that's internationalism and rank and file committees. It's what's going to stop fascism.
Well, there was a movement in the late 30s, 39, of 10 locals that met and supported the idea of a workers' party, a labor party, against the support for the Democrats. What's your view about a formation of a workers' party, a labor party in the United States?
Well, there is one. I mean, it's the Socialist Equality Party. That's who writes for the WSWS. And I think that workers that are, forward thinking, that agree with the things I'm saying, should make an attempt to join it. And I mean, it's not enough to only have, go ahead.
But isn't, I mean, the SEP is a revolutionary party, a revolutionary socialist Trotskyist party. That's not a mass labor party. I think in the 30s and 40s, the SWP, which was the Trotskyists at that time, supported the formation of a mass labor party of the entire working class and a fight in the unions against the bureaucracy who were supporting the Democrats. You see that transition going directly to a revolutionary party. In other words, the process inside the working classes that it doesn't directly go to revolutionary consciousness. It's the transitional program was a method of looking at how to organize the work in mass against the capitalists so that they could be a political development.
Well, I mean, it needs to be built. I'm not saying it's a mass party now. I joined it, and it needs to be, built on the foundation of that understanding that we need a mass party. I'm not saying that it's currently this huge organization, but I'm saying it does need to be built by, and workers need to recognize, the cause for building it.
Well, if you won the leadership of the UAW, what would you do? I mean, for example, the UAW right now supports the Democrats. They spend all this money on supporting the Democrats, not supporting the case workers who are on strike, for example, or other workers who are actually struggling. What would you do politically in the UAW and in the AFL-CIO, the whole labor movement as a whole, if you won leadership?
Well, I don't agree with any support of any Democrats or Republicans with union member funding. But again, my turn has been this entire time not about what I can do with the bureaucratic power of the UAW, but what the workers are going to do. What are the workers going to do if they see that I'm elected? To me, it's going to be a massive shift in consciousness that would even get me elected. I'm saying a lot of very unconventional things, and those points are coming across to the workers. So if they're understanding that and they're, working on that and electing me, then that would have to be because the idea of a rank and file committee is something that they want to build. So I would work with workers to build that. And that's where the real power is, not so much, as I view it anyway, in the hands of, what the UAW bureaucracy can do. It needs to be that power directly in all the workers' hands. But yeah, I agree that the UAW should not be supporting any politician. I know I know several different opponents of mine naturally want to support Democrats. One had made the claim that he'll support whoever is pro-worker. Well, how do you measure that? We've had decades of concessions. They're all not pro-worker.
Well, I mean, the Democratic Party is a capitalist party. I mean, they don't make any
Right.
bones about it. They support capitalism and the capitalist system, Pelosi. So it's not, you're basically supporting a party that openly says we support capitalism, the system, which is based on exploitation.
Right. And I mean, the Republican Party doesn't want any workers organizing whatsoever. So you have two parties that are fundamentally against your best interest as a worker. Why would you give them funding? They don't need our dues money. Same thing with all these other things that the UAW decides to get involved with. It's just, the reality is the workers need control over that funds. We need to democratically, all of us, decide where that funding goes. And to me, it's the main thing is the funding should be backing striking workers, and that's it. All the assets need to be for the struggle that they enter into. They make these claims that they can't pay full pay to striking workers because, well, a number of things. One, it'll deplete the strike fund. Well, I make the case that wouldn't you sacrifice your bank account to save your house? You're not supposed to protect the strike fund. It's supposed to protect you. And, naturally, there's a lot of ways to increase that strike fund. The UAW's assets are 1.16 billion in total, and the strike fund is 800 some million. So you sell off all those other assets, put it right in the strike fund.
And what is the UAW and others doing to support this case strike?
Nothing. They had increased the strike pay to 500 over the convention, but then they took it back immediately. They're not spreading word of the CNH strike to, other workers in other industries. They're not expanding the fight. They're leaving them out on their own, isolated. I'm calling for workers to have rank and file committees, build one there, spread the word of your struggle. It's these workers in these fights that need to directly speak to what's going on. Right now that is kind of an isolationist tactic is, just send workers out, don't talk about it. How are they supposed to win?
Do you think that they're afraid of bringing all the workers together who are struggling? There are many, many struggles all over the country of workers against union busting, against attacks. You think that the bureaucracy is afraid that if all these workers get together, it would move towards a general strike?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it threatens their comfortable positions. When you make $270,000 detached from the floor in company boardroom meetings like a Mercedes and Detroit Diesel, that's directly against your best interest. And when you have stock in GM, that's directly against your best interest. So that's why the workers, who it is in their best interest, need to connect with each other on the floors.
And Marty Walsh, the Secretary of Labor, has been involved in negotiations on the West Coast with the ILWU and the railroad workers. What's his role?
Well, Marty Walsh, I recognize the name.
He's the Secretary of Labor under Biden. He was the one that was brought in for negotiations
with the PEB, with the PEB, the Presidential Emergency.
Yes.
So, I mean, his role is to basically give the workers a contract that ram it down their throat that's below cost of living. I think it was 22% over 5 years. It works out to like 4.4% a year, whereas cost of living is at 9, right around 9. It was at up to 9.5, went down to 8.5. I think it's settled around 9. So that's eaten up in the first year alone. Your first year, you're taking a pay cut, and that has been brought up as well. An older worker that used to be in the IBEW brought up to me in our strike in 2019 when we got 3% for the first year, 2% for the next, and 1% after that. He's like, that's not even cost of living. He said, we're only getting it for 1 year. And that was when it was at 3. So workers are watching this and doing the math. And same thing with railroad workers. They absolutely want to strike, and they absolutely could shut down the country. And workers, I guarantee, would see that fight and support it. So they're doing everything they can to stop that. Naturally, they don't want workers reaching out to each other, and they certainly don't want any threats to the country because workers are taking the power into their own hands. And I absolutely think, go ahead.
Well, I mean, this also workers are very angry about what happened during the pandemic, COVID, being forced to work. Weren't there some wildcats in the UAW of workers who were basically being told they had to work in the middle of a surge of COVID in their plants?
Yeah, there were some Jeep workers that walked out. And honestly, at the very beginning, the mood was very tense in my plant. We didn't walk out, but it was, there are certain times where you feel like something's about to happen. And workers were definitely very suspicious of the motives behind having us in the plant when something that is this deadly could potentially kill them. And naturally, that got diluted by propaganda from the right, and that the right, I guess, sort of includes the Democrats too, because they made it a vaccine-only issue, where, and then send workers back in. And
did they do testing in your plant of workers to see that if somebody had it, that they would be able to protect the other workers?
No. And they had an article in the look. They did some testing, but it was a joke. It was like you pulled up to a canopy, they scanned your forehead, And if you didn't have a fever, they let you go. And if you did have a fever, they told you to pull over for a couple minutes. And the next time they scanned you, you somehow magically passed. So, and
He
people
wanted
would
to
get
keep production going, in other words.
right. Yeah, and people would get sick, and they say that they inform everybody of who got sick. I know workers have died, and they never reported it. They either put them in a recovered or a still active case. And it's just overlooked.
And was that because the UAW went along with that? They wanted production to go like management, regardless of the cost?
Well, the UAW raised no fuss because they didn't feel they needed to. I mean, they're sitting in their position. They actually both got voted. Well, two of the big spots got voted out, not necessarily over COVID, mostly over the last contract. But yeah, they totally were complicit in the entire affair. I mean, they didn't care.
And I mean, I think the railroad workers as well, having to go through the pandemic and then cutting down of crews, they want one-man trains, like a 5-mile train. I mean, it seems like the conditions are getting more and more atrocious for workers.
Yeah, that's safe staffing ratios is a big thing for nurses as well. But yeah, that's one of the main railroad sticking points is staffing ratios. I mean, in a different sense, for trains and increased workload. And the scheduling, I know, is another big one where they basically have them on call with that high vis and what's the other one? I know there was another one. It's same thing as high vis. Where it's basically forcing workers to miss out on all kinds of family time, any kind of personal time to, have doctor visits or anything else. And then nurses is the same thing. It's another critical industry in the country. Keep the health of the citizens is in jeopardy because they want to, squeeze the most out of nurses. And then you have situations like a Redonda Vaught, who she makes a medical mistake, comes forward with it, and gets penalized. Her nursing license taken away and gets put on probation for, I believe, 3 months. And, this is the result of this negligence with how they treat workers. And it's only going to get worse if workers don't fight back.
And in the case of the railroad workers, you have the Railway Labor Act, which really was passed to prevent railroad worker strikes. It seems like the union's top leadership have accepted it. There's no fight to get rid of the Railroad Labor Act. Is that because they really go along with anti-labor legislation because it was used to break railroad strikes?
Right. And I mean, as far as the striking is concerned, every worker needs to look at it, in my perspective, as it's your labor power that you're selling to that company. That's your commodity, is your labor power. And it's your right to withhold that commodity at any time. And I understand that might come into conflict with the RLA, but the reality is it's yours and you can withhold it at any time. And that's whether it's legal or not, you've got to see that as your right. And, the unions are definitely going to agree with the government. They're, agents of the state anymore. They're not like they were in the old days. They're not the same type of railroad union Eugene Debs fought for. So workers need to realize that's their labor power.
And Eugene Debs was put in prison for opposing the First World War. There's been a statement recently released by ILW members calling for the ILW to take action against the Ukraine war, against continued military armament of Ukraine. What's your view about war and militarization that's going on in the United States' drive for war against Russia and China?
Well, I mean, workers need to see it as a class issue. We have no interest in any national wars. We need to follow the map of class struggle. And the reality is we have no enemies in the working class in China or Russia or Ukraine or any of these other countries. We have no enemies there. Those are our coworkers. I have no interest whatsoever in my tax dollars going to send bombs to kill people in any country anywhere. I don't care what the U.S. says the interest is or what Democrat or Republican says the emergency is. The reality is I'm in alliance with any coworker anywhere in the world. So, yeah, we absolutely shouldn't be allowing this. And there should be a general strike over that alone.
And the UAW bureaucracy was forced to support a boycott of South Africa. They also, after the black members, a large number demanded it, but also there was a couple of years ago, there was an action by grad students to have a boycott of Israel because of its apartheid treatment of the Palestinians. And the UAW bureaucracy said that it would affect UAW members who were making weapons for Israel. What do you think about this idea of the UAW bureaucracy that you can't take action because it would affect workers who were making armaments, for example, in the military industrial complex?
Well, the reality is the UAW doesn't want to see it as a class issue, and the UAW isn't really forced to do anything. They might get told by the government, but the reality is they're getting paid with our dues money to represent us, to back us. That's where their interest is supposed to lie. So if the UAW has to do something that the government says they're not supposed to do, and that should absolutely be what the UAW does if they're working in the workers' best interest, but they're not interested in that. I mean, I'm not as familiar with those other two things, but like I said, if it's not in the workers' best interest, the UAW shouldn't be doing it, no matter what the government says. They're not paid by the, well, I mean, they're not supposed to be paid by the government. They're getting our dues, so they should be representing us and our interests.
And this is the first time in the history of the UAW that rank and filers such as yourself were able to run for the national leadership of the UAW. Have there been any attempts to suppress your right to get your supporters' right to get your views out to UAW members? And the monitor, which you're paying for, UAW members are paying for, has it been a fair and democratic election process?
Well, absolutely not. Naturally, the monitor, I got kicked. Well, one attempt was made by a UAW bureaucrat named Sean Meacham to kick us out of the Flint assembly plant for GM. And, luckily I was able to talk to workers, and I had two other volunteers with me that were able to take, occupy him. But anyway, so there were attempts made. The monitor said they were going to look into it, never did anything to my knowledge about it. And they said they would handle it quietly and independently. And, naturally, that's just going to encourage that type of behavior by other bureaucrats. As far as the debate hasn't been spread to any worker that I'm aware of. It's only got around 14,000 views, and there's 1 million UAW members, 600,000 retired and 372,000-ish active. And it's got 14,000 views. And the monitor said they were going to get the word out to workers about it. So naturally, that's not being, distributed either. And also, we were supposed to have availability for phone banking and mass texting, and we've never gotten that, despite constant appeals. The monitor just says, the rules state you have access to it or something to that effect. But we never got it. So we're not able to reach workers. We don't have the phone trees that the UAW has, and all their internal,
apparatus.
numbers.
They have a tremendous apparatus.
Right. I don't have that. I don't have the backing of any of that or the information of any of that. I'm kept far away from that. But, so it's being very quiet. Workers we talk to don't even know that there's an election going on. Retirees don't even know that they're allowed to vote. And, that stems from they're not even allowed to run. Coakley and Gannan were both barred from running. And they say, oh, well, experience is important. Well, there's two of the most experienced people aren't even allowed to run. So, it's a joke, and it's very anti-democratic.
And the last debate, the only debate for president in the UAW, you felt that Stephen Greenhouse, who was the moderator, put something in that debate that was incorrect. Why don't you talk about that and what happened as a result of your complaint to him about what he did in the debate?
So I was a little blindsided in the debate by this question that, he assured me was an exact quote, during the questioning. I didn't remember on the fly ever speaking to Sasa Times. It's been very busy, and I just kind of took him at his word, but knew the quote did not sound correct.
What was the quote?
I believe he said something to the effect of, I'm against all trade unions and I want to eliminate all trade unions, something like that. And my quote was much more in line with, I want to eliminate the bureaucratic layer of the UAW apparatus and put the power directly in the hands of the workers. All right. The workers have built up massive amount of assets, 1.16 billion. They deserve to have control of that asset directly. So anyway, I answered his question as best as I could, pointing back to that. That's what I'm calling for, the elimination of the bureaucratic layer. But the reality is, he asked me from a definitely suspicious source, didn't want to mention the World Socialist website. And because that's where my direct quote was from. And the Sasa Times looks like some kind of translation into another language and then back into English or something like that. And anyone can publish anything to it. So I asked for a correction, because he's supposed to be a distinguished reporter or ex-reporter for the New York Times. And I thought that that's not too unreasonable to ask for, because he made a mistake. And if I misquoted him, I'd gladly apologize, and publicly. But that's too much to ask from him. So he's not going to do so.
So you feel he misquoted you and basically doesn't want to say that he put something out there that wasn't true about your position.
Right. And now workers are going to see that as well and think I sound crazy if they listen to his quote. If I'm abolishing everything, like that does sound nuts. I'm not talking about workers having control of their organization directly, not how he frames it. And that also confuses the layer to workers about who is the bureaucrat and who's the worker, so.
And Stephen Greenhouse has never talked about class struggle. I don't think he mentions the word class struggle. There are people who are saying that you can have militant unionism without a political struggle in the labor movement. Do you think just being militant is enough to defend the labor movement?
Well, no, naturally you have to have a political perspective. I mean, Brian Keller acts militant, but he doesn't have a political perspective. He says he's not political. Well, everything's political. I mean, and lacking that understanding, lacking a real history of why, being political and not having a political perspective is necessary is absolutely going to lead you down the wrong path time and time again. Workers do need a political program. They need to understand, what everything is working in the case of, so they can draw the correct conclusions from that. Like go ahead.
Oh, go on.
Like, what are the Democrats' interests really? What are the Republicans' interests? Why are they interested in those things? And what would interest you politically as a worker? What are your political interests? Those kinds of things. And workers need to draw those conclusions. And it needs to be. It's a very serious thing. It's not something that you can just say, oh, I don't have any political leanings. I don't have any political understanding, so I'm just going to do what feels right. It doesn't make any sense.
And it seems like a lot of the union money and resources going towards election of Democrats. That's where they want electioneering and campaigning. The kind of campaigning they do for Democrats, they're not doing that apparently for workers who are on strike.
Right.
They'll mobilize for Democratic Party politicians, but they won't mobilize for their own members who are on strike on picket lines.
Right. The working class is just used as a way to feed these bureaucrats at the top, whether they're Democratic Party politicians or the UAW itself. And it's constant circle of, patting each other on the back at the top while workers are getting sold out on the strike line. So absolutely, it's definitely the funding's being used for all the wrong reasons, and workers need to, draw that conclusion.
Okay, well, I want to thank you, Will, for joining us on Work Week. We're talking with Will Lehman, and he's running for president of the UAW. Thanks for joining us, Will.
Thanks for having me on.